Before we dive into the neon-lit boulevards of Moscow and the rain-slicked granite of St. Petersburg, I have a question for you. Why is it that the world's most seasoned travelers, people who have seen the skylines of Manhattan and the sleek streets of Tokyo, often find themselves completely paralyzed by a single visit to Russia? There is a psychological phenomenon, a whispered secret among expats, that once you taste the true, unvarnished hospitality found within a high-rise Russian apartment, the rest of the world starts to feel a little too cold, a little too transactional, and strangely empty. Today we are uncovering the hidden mechanics of the Russian soul through a story that sounds like a fever dream but is the lived reality for those who dare to navigate the urban sprawl with an open heart. We're going deep into a narrative of high-end business meetings, midnight kitchen talks, and a level of urban generosity that defies modern logic. But before we begin this journey into the metropolitan heartbeat of the East, I want to know who is joining us today. Drop a comment below and let me know which corner of the globe you are watching from. Stay with me because by the end of this, you might find yourself looking at one-way flights to a city you were told was a concrete jungle, but will eventually call your sanctuary. The story begins with Julian, a high-flying corporate consultant from London who viewed the world through the cold, calculated lens of spreadsheets and 5-year plans. To Julian, Russia was nothing more than a series of headlines and a difficult visa process, a place he was visiting only to finalize a tech merger in the heart of Moscow City's skyscraper district. He arrived at Sheremetyevo International Airport with his designer suit and a sense of hurried importance, expecting the legendary frostiness of a 12 million-person metropolis to match the sub-zero temperatures outside. He stepped into a pre-booked black car, his mind already on the boardroom, viewing the city as just another node in the global economy. He was a man who paid for luxury and expected efficiency, but as he watched the golden domes of the Kremlin pass by through tinted glass, he had no idea that his meticulously planned 72-hour business trip was about to be completely dismantled by the very people he intended to consult. Just as his car reached the bustling Tverskaya Street, a massive snowstorm, the kind that turns a metropolis into a white labyrinth, paralyzed the traffic. His driver, a man named Artyom who spoke English with a gravelly, melodic accent, turned off the meter and looked at Julian's stressed face in the rearview mirror. Instead of a professional apology, Artyom simply reached into his glove box, pulled out a thermos of hot tea infused with mountain herbs, and handed it back, saying, "In Moscow, the snow decides the schedule, not the boss." This was Julian's first lesson in the city hospitality secret. Even in a city of millions, the individual is never ignored. Artyom didn't just leave him at the curb. When it became clear the car wasn't moving, he walked Julian through the snow to a nearby Stalinka apartment block where his cousin ran a small cafe, ensuring the foreigner was warm and fed before he even asked for a dime. He spent his first night not in the sterile luxury of his hotel, but in a crowded, high-ceilinged apartment in the Arbat district, invited by a business associate named Dmitry who insisted that hotels are for tourists, but friends sleep in homes. Dmitry and his wife, Anya, lived in a space filled with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and the scent of roasting meat, and within 20 minutes of arriving, Julian found himself stripped of his blazer and wearing a pair of oversized guest slippers. Elena, Dmitry's mother, was already laying out a spread that looked like a state banquet. Smoked salmon, bowls of bright orange ikra, and steaming plates of pelmeni. Julian tried to explain he had emails to send, but Anya simply placed a glass of tea in his hand and told him that in Moscow, the night is for the soul, and the work can wait for the morning light. This was the kitchen culture in its purest form, a metropolitan DNA that dictates a guest is a gift, transforming a cold business contact into a lifelong bond over a single meal. On his second day, Julian expected to be back on his corporate grind, but the city had a way of slowing him down that defied his London-paced internal clock. He woke up to the sound of a bustling Moscow morning, but instead of a quick espresso and a granola bar, he was presented with serniki, fluffy cheese pancakes served with thick, farm-fresh smetana. When Julian tried to hail an app-based taxi to head to the financial district, Dmitry stopped him, insisting on taking him via the metro, not just for the commute, but to show him the underground palaces. As they walked through stations like Komsomolskaya, draped in chandeliers and marble, Julian realized that the city was built to inspire the common person, not just to move them. This was the second stage of the hospitality trap, the pride the Muscovites take in their city's beauty, and their insistence that you see it through their eyes, not through a tourist guidebook. By the afternoon of day 2, a simple coffee break with a potential investor turned into a 4-hour philosophical odyssey in a trendy cafe near Patriarch's Ponds. The investor, a woman named Katerina who controlled millions in venture capital, spent less than 10 minutes talking about the merger and the rest of the time discussing Bulgakov's literature and the history of the streets they were walking on. She noticed Julian's slight cough from the dry city air and immediately sent her assistant to a local pharmacy to get a specific Siberian pine syrup for him. There was no transaction, no, "I'll do this if you sign that," and no hidden agenda. It was a radical, unbuffered kindness that Julian found deeply disorienting for a high-stakes business environment. He realized that in London, networking was a hunt, but in Moscow, it was a ritual of building a svyaz, a deep, spiritual connection that prioritized the human over the profit. The evening of the second day brought Julian to a modern banya complex in the city center, a ritual he had heard was a must-do, but was wholly unprepared to experience with such intensity. Surrounded by the city's power brokers and creative elite, all stripped of their status and sitting in the steam together, Julian felt a profound sense of urban equality. As the banshik worked his magic with oak branches, the heat seemed to melt away the layers of corporate armor Julian had worn for a decade. They sat together in the lounge afterward, eating dried fish and drinking cold kvass, and Julian found himself laughing at jokes he barely understood and sharing stories about his childhood he hadn't told anyone in years. The city secret was proving to be a form of social alchemy, turning the anonymity of a megacity into the intimacy of a village through shared heat and vulnerability. By the third day, the tech merger that had brought Julian to Russia felt like a trivial pursuit, a petty obsession with digital growth that paled in comparison to the human growth he was experiencing. He met with the legal team in a glass-walled office in Moscow City, but instead of a sterile negotiation, they had brought in a samovar and homemade pies. The lead lawyer, a man who looked like a character from a spy novel, spent the first hour asking Julian about his impressions of the Tretiakov Gallery and insisting they visit a specific jazz club that evening. Julian realized that the secret was an urban code of conduct that viewed every business visitor as a potential member of the extended family. When he finally looked at the merger documents, he saw them through the lens of the people they would affect, not just the numbers they would generate. As the sun began to set on his third day, Julian received a notification on his phone, a frantic message from his firm in London demanding a status report on the negotiations. Looking at the screen, he felt a wave of nausea at the thought of returning to a world where status was measured by billable hours and reports were written in a language that lacked any soul. He looked out the window at the sprawling city below, with its twinkling lights and the frozen Moscow River cutting a dark path through the center, and he felt a profound sense of belonging. The transformation was complete. The hospitality secret had done its work, exposing the emptiness of his modern life by filling it with the vibrant, chaotic, and loving energy of the city. He realized that the reason expats never leave Moscow is that it offers a version of urban life that hasn't been sterilized by overpoliteness. Julian decided then and there that his business visit was over, but his life in Russia was just beginning, and he sent a single-sentence email resigning from his firm while sitting in a 24-hour bookstore on New Arbat. He surrendered to the Moscow gravity, the force that keeps travelers rooted in the city's soil long after their hotels have been checked out. He began to see that the hospitality secret was actually a philosophy of urban abundance, the belief that in a city of 12 million, there is always a seat at the table for a stranger. He spent that evening helping Anya's younger brother practice his English, feeling a sense of community that no London members club could ever provide. He was no longer a consultant. He was becoming a Muscovite, a thread in the intricate high-energy tapestry of the capital. His transition from a high-powered consultant to a city resident was not a retreat from the world, but a deep dive into it, moving from the abstractions of finance into the reality of street-level humanity. He traded his sterile apartment in Kensington for a high-ceilinged flat with a view of the Seven Sisters skyscrapers, finding that his hands, once used only for keyboards, were now busy carrying groceries for elderly neighbors. He learned that the secret of the city dwellers was their refusal to let the urban environment turn them into ghosts. They remained fiercely, stubbornly present in every interaction. Julian started a social media channel documenting the hidden Moscow, and soon he was receiving messages from around the world from people who were tired of the lonely city syndrome of the West. A few months later, a former colleague from London tracked him down, convinced that Julian had suffered a midlife crisis or had been brainwashed by the intensity of the East. This colleague arrived in his crisp suit, looking at the crowded metro and the late-night tea culture with a mixture of pity and confusion, complaining about the lack of order and the unpredictability of the city. Julian hosted him in his new home, letting the city secret do its work, taking him to the 24-hour flower markets and the underground clubs where strangers become brothers by dawn. Within 48 hours, the colleague had stopped checking his watch. By the third night, he was engaged in a deep debate about Dostoevsky with a taxi driver at 3 a.m. Julian realized that the hospitality wasn't just a tradition. It was a metropolitan superpower, a way of making the world feel small and safe even in the shadow of giants. The legend of the astonished consultant began to spread, becoming a symbol of the new age of urban travel, where the destination is not a monument but a connection. Julian's life became a masterclass in the hospitality secret, as he watched the city absorb more and more professionals who had come for a conference and stayed for a decade. He saw that the secret was a form of metropolitan trust, where the hard exterior of the city is just a shell for a core of pure, unadulterated warmth. He watched as the city's youth, despite their iPhones and designer clothes, still maintained the ancient duty of taking care of the guest first and themselves second. Julian realized that he hadn't lost his career. He had simply traded a cubicle for a city and a title for a family. As our documentary gaze pans across the vast, illuminated skyline of Moscow, we see Julian sitting in a rooftop cafe, a glass of tea in his hand and a look of absolute peace on his face. He reflects on those first 3 days, the shock of the tea-carrying driver, the heat of the banya, and the depth of the kitchen conversations, and realizes they were the most important hours of his life. He understands now that the hospitality secret is the ultimate act of urban rebellion against a world that wants us to be anonymous and efficient. In the heart of Russia's capital, he found a place where stranger is just a word for a guest who hasn't been fed yet. He is a man who came for a merger and stayed for the soul, a man who realized that the greatest investment is a life lived in a community that cares. The story of Julian is the story of every expat who has ever stepped off a plane in Russia and found themselves unable to board the return flight. It is a story of radical urban belonging, a concept that seems like a myth in the modern West but is a nightly reality in the apartments of the East. They are people who realize that the secret is not a mystery to be solved, but a gift to be accepted without question. In the neon glow of the Moscow night, they found a level of sincerity that made their old lives look like black and white films. Julian's apartment is now a sanctuary for the weary, a place where the hospitality secret continues to work its magic on anyone brave enough to ask for directions. So, as we close this journey through the metropolitan heart of the East, we return to the question we asked at the beginning. Why is it that those who visit never want to leave? The answer is simple, because in Russia's cities, they finally find the humanity they didn't know they were missing in the concrete jungles of the West. The secret of Russian hospitality is that it doesn't just host your body. It nourishes the parts of you that have been starving for genuine connection. It is a homecoming for the urban spirit, a radical act of love in an age of architectural isolation. If you ever find yourself at a crossroads, remember the man who was astonished after just 3 days and decided to never go back. Russia doesn't just host you, it claims you, and once you have been claimed by such metropolitan warmth, there is nowhere else in the world you would rather be.